a long layover.
Right.
To keep the door.
Yeah, no, I imagine that. All right, let's go ahead and get rolling here and talk about investing. A couple scriptural thoughts here, and then we're going to start talking about practical stuff in that regard. The Bible says a lot about investing, and one of my favorite passages on the topic is Proverbs 6:6-11. And so let's see. Jason, why don't you read Proverbs 6:6-11 for us? We'll work our way up, so be ready if I give you a verse.
Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man.
Okay. Obviously, biblically, there's wisdom in providing for the future while you're able to do so. And that's what God speaks of in this passage concerning the wisdom of the ant. And they lay up in store for the future when supply is abundant, right? I mean, in abundant times, you should be investing and laying back for preparing for the lean times. We see that same principle played out with Joseph in the Old Testament, and that's a brilliant picture of that. Joseph knew there's going to be 7 years of abundance, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. Well, what do? Well, let's just enjoy the abundance when it's abundant, and then what do we do when it's, well, we're going to starve to death, you know. Well, no one starved in Egypt. As a matter of fact, it sustained God's people even because of the prudence that he had, the wisdom that he had to lay up in store for the lean times. And so investing for the future is something that ought to be something we see as very biblical. We see how in doing so, God sustained his own people there in Genesis, and we see the principles there in Proverbs and other places as well. Likewise, we see in Matthew 25 and the parable of the talents, the principle there of investing and even the rebuke of a lack of investing. All right, so turn over to Matthew chapter 25, and this principle of the talents, and it is here in this chapter, okay? And so verse number 14, and Brother Reddick, I want you to read verse number 14, and read all the way down to verse number 30.
For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. And straightway took his journey. Then he that had received 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and hid his Lord's money. After a long time the Lord of those servants cometh and reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. He also that had received 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents beside them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Then he which had received 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talents in the earth. Lo, there thou hast, that is thine. His Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
So there's a principle laid out here, okay, and we understand the context that these three men, one's given 5 talents. It says, I've gained 5 more. And the implication is that he used those 5 to gain 5. He got 100% return on his investment, okay? Then the servant with 2 did the same. He invested those. He got 100% return. He gained 2 more. The one that had 1, and this is a kind of an interesting principle here. Usually it's the one with the least that does the least, right? Did the one with 5 do more than the one with 2 as far as return goes? No. They were actually equal in return. They both had 100% return. It's the one that had the least that invested the least and did the least, right? And the response here is very telling. He said, you should have at least given it to the exchangers so I could have mine own with usury. And the word usury means interest. So I don't even get any interest. I gave it to you to multiply. I could have done better leaving it with the exchanger. I would have at least got interest. You should have at least done that, right? So principally then understanding, and I understand the context of this, he's using money and he's using this principle as an illustration of a greater spiritual truth, but don't miss the fact that there is the physical, practical application of this that how he viewed money was that you should be putting your money to work for you. Your money should not remain static. Burying it in a mayonnaise jar in the backyard is not a good use of your money, because that's what this guy did. I buried it and I didn't invest it. So God wants us to invest. Now, I will say this, there are times where we invest and we may lose some money. And you say, well, then that was a bad decision. Interestingly here, he said, you should have at least tried. You should have at least tried to get some interest on it, right? So you have to be prudent about investing and wise about investing. I completely agree with that. But biblically, I mean, you take that passage and you're like, well, but I'm not going to invest. Well, it was a foolish servant that didn't invest. The master told him that. You're a foolish servant. So no doubt, God wants us to invest what we receive. He does. He wants us to invest what he entrusts us with. Proverbs 13:22, we mentioned this verse before. But a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. You won't leave an inheritance like that if you don't invest properly. Investing is not something that preachers talk about very much. In fact, a lot of preachers I mentioned earlier are kind of, for preachers, are against it themselves, or for a preacher to be involved. I was told by someone early on in ministry, I mentioned this earlier, that Social Security wasn't going to be there, so that'd be a waste of resources if you paid Social Security, because you'll never, reap it and all this type of stuff. I wish I hadn't listened to that guy, by the way, now, but nonetheless, it is what it is. I've lived long enough to see many of those same people become burdens on churches because they failed to plan for themselves. And it's not spiritual to say, I'm just going to die in the pulpit. That doesn't make you more spiritual. You should prepare and plan. I have no intention of quitting ministry. I'm not talking about my personal opinion here, okay? But I do have an intention of stepping out of the pastorate of Beth Haven Baptist Church, okay? In sometime in my early 60s, I plan to step down as pastor. Now, fortunately, I'm only 49 right now. Okay, so I've got a few years yet. So some church members here don't get nervous, right? But I don't plan to pastor until I'm 75, 80 years old. Because I want the best for this church. I don't want to just, be in that spot. And so I plan on doing ministry though till I die. And by the way, every one of us can do that, right? Yeah.
I have a question. Do the pastors that don't believe in the investing, do they believe that the church is gonna give them a pension or?
Or it's gonna take care of it.
Or it's just gonna take care of them, is what they say, until they get to that point, and then they say, you know, yeah, the church has to do this. The church is responsible for me. I know of a church right now who has a new pastor, and the agreement the pastor made in order for him to resign was that the church agreed to continue paying his salary until he died. So they have to pay his salary, and they're paying
And
another pastor's salary, and that's not uncommon at all. I mean, I know several.
is
in
that
that kind
wrong
of
for
situation.
them to do that? Put a,
It's wrong for that preacher to have put that burden on the church. I believe.
Okay.
I believe that's wrong for a preacher to put that burden on the church. If the church had the ability and the church wanted to do it, that's not wrong for the church to do. I think it's wrong for a preacher to demand something like that. So, anyway, that's my opinion. Now, everything I'm going to tell you from this point on is just my opinions. So that you know, I'm being honest about that, okay? I'm going to talk about the current investment market and various things, okay? Everything from this point on is not financial advice in that sense, okay? I've been giving you financial advice in a sense of saying, keep a record of your finances, and here's how, and do a budget, and here's how, and get out of debt. Here's a method for getting out of debt. Okay, that is technically financial advice in that sense. Okay, but what I'm going to talk about now is investing. In the last 4 years, I spent learning everything I could about investing. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert. I've taken courses. I've read books. I've tried to educate myself. I've learned a lot about this topic because that was my intention for this purpose. And that being said, what I'm going to say is still just my opinion, and take it under consideration, but don't buy or sell anything based on what I tell you. You do your own research, you educate yourself, you get your sense of what you need to do, and most importantly, you pray about what God wants you to do. That's the most important thing. Okay. This at best is just a starting point for you to understand different types of investments. So let's talk about this for just a minute. We have already talked about the distinction or difference between assets and liabilities and things like that. But let's talk about the economy in a broader sense. Okay. In 2008, we had a financial crisis in the U.S. There's different types of economists. There's microeconomists and macroeconomists. Microeconomists look at what's going on today, the news that's going to impact the markets this week. You know, they're releasing CPI data, and they're doing this and they're doing this. And those type of things certainly impact the market on a short-term basis. People that are traders, that's what matters to them. Okay. And I'm not a trader. I tried that to try and just understand it. And I think I mentioned this at the beginning or sometime nearing the beginning of the class. If it's your career, that's one thing, but just as a generally speaking, it's just like completely stressful and consuming and whatnot if you're trying to do day trading type stuff or whatever. I'm not a trader. I don't encourage that. I looked into a lot of that stuff and read a lot, and I think that it's mostly largely motivated through greed and so forth. The other side of things is what's called a macroeconomist. Macroeconomy is what is the broad trend? Okay, what is the trend of where things are going? I say that to explain this. In 2008, there was a financial crisis, and it was the first time in history of the United States and really across the world where they didn't allow us to experience the crush of the problem. Actually, It certainly was impactful in the United States. It happened in a way that it really caused problems. However, what they did is they just started pushing more and more money into the economy and what they called quantitative easing. And they prevented what should have been a major recession. They prevented it. But what they did was they learned that they could prevent recession through this means. And so they started just functioning in that fashion. 2008, they printed their way out of it. So then they kind of lay back, and then within a few years it happened again, and they printed their way out of it again. 2020 was part of the cycle. Every 4 years there's a liquidity cycle now, and it's been this way since 2008. 2008 to 12, 12 to 16, 16 to 20, 20 to 24, okay, is the liquidity cycle. So we're into the end of this cycle, and we'll be heading into the beginning of the next. And what they do in this transition is the print time, okay? And you can look at the markets and you can see this. You can watch as they dump money into the economy, and the markets just skyrocket, okay? Right now, we're getting geared up. It's already really kind of started, but it hasn't really hit full bore. But between now and if it's a normal cycle, between now and the fall of next year is going to be an economic boom on the stock markets and crypto and all that type of stuff. And it is going to go skyrocket. Not because of any normal economic philosophy, but because they're stuck in this cycle. Okay, they got to print their way out of it. What they're actually doing is they keep running this interest up, and the interest payment becomes so large that they don't have any choice. They have to roll the interest payment into the balance sheet, and the printing is designed to do that. It actually they're gonna print out of the interest, and they're gonna pay off the interest with dumping the money. That's what they're doing, is they're dumping the money into the economy to pay off the interest and just roll it into the balance sheet. And that debt clock just is gonna wind like a fan blowing, and so that is what's going to happen. It's going to happen this year, 24 to 25, and it'll happen again in another 4 years beyond that.
So it coincides with the presidential election.
Coincides with presidential elections. It coincides with the Bitcoin halving. It coincides with a lot of stuff because of the way that it happened in 2008. It wasn't like they planned it necessarily to coincide with presidential elections, but it happened that way, and it probably really started that way because essentially the ruling party doesn't want to get blamed for a recession crash, right? And so they're not going to let the economy crash during a presidential election. And it just so happens that every 4 years, that's where we are, where we really should be crashing, but they print our way out of it again. There's an economist, a macroeconomist by the name of Raoul Pal, and he's kind of a vulgar person, and I'm saying that up front. I'm not endorsing him in the sense of that, but he has what he calls the everything code, and he explains this liquidity cycle very well. Okay, but he uses vulgarity a fair amount too. But he's a macroeconomist. His perspective is, and I mentioned this about AI and whatnot, his perspective is that the problem is the GDP, they have to increase productivity to get out of the liquidity cycle they're in until they get out, until productivity goes up so that the GDP raises in a manner absent from population, then we're stuck in this liquidity cycle. He also, however, does seem to believe that basically we've got this cycle and one more, and it'll be over. Because worldwide, the U.S. is in a terrible situation, but the rest of the world is in an even worse situation. And worldwide, he doesn't think that the world can sustain more than this cycle and one more. So he basically thinks by 2030, it's going to crash. They have to have the new system in place by 2030. This is what he believes. I'm not trying to present this in a sense of like a doomsday type idea, or in the idea of a conspiracy theory. There's a lot of economic study. If you listen to and watch their things, it's very clear the cycle. I mean, it's really not questioned what I'm saying to you. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge. Okay. Now, how long it'll last is debated. Okay, but it's in such a terrible state right now that the idea that it can go on indefinitely is absolutely not accurate. So they have to hit some sort of AI productivity boom, to where productivity skyrockets and it basically pulls GDP out and pays the debt down as a result. Okay, that being said, I'm going to go back to the same statement I used, a verse I used a minute. The ant gathers meat in the summer. Okay, you basically have this year, next year, and then theoretically there will be a slump again, a large slump, and they call it spring, summer, fall, and winter. The slump is the winter. Okay, and they say right now we're in the summer now. Okay, we came out of the spring, and this goes with accumulation distribution models. We will cover accumulation distribution models on Saturday, and the Wyckoff accumulation distribution model. Interestingly, Wyckoff developed these philosophies in the 1930s, and they still work even with this current cycle. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Elliott wave principle, and understanding how markets move in this regard, and then accumulation and distribution. So when you get to the end of accumulation is the spring, and then you have the market launch, that's the summer, and then you have distribution, that's the fall, and you drop back down. The big crash is the winter, and then it starts over again. Okay, does that make sense? So you have your accumulation, the market's down here, and then it comes up, and then you're gonna have distribution, and then a fall, and then like so. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4: spring, summer, fall, winter. Okay, in the concept, right? And we'll talk about Wyckoff describes these scenarios as well as Elliott. Okay, and these guys were in the early 1900s and saw this same principle in the markets in the early 1900s, and it's still active today. It's just now it's in an almost predictable 4-year cycle, and it wasn't before. Okay, it was not in a constant pattern, but since 2008, every 4 years, this is what happens. Okay, and so this gives us a way to kind of evaluate, and because we can see this in the markets, it gives us an understanding of when to invest and when to store. Does that make sense? So really, when everyone's saying it's the market's dead, there's no reason to it's going nowhere and it's all over, this is when you invest. Okay, and then it's going to do this. Now you might invest along here because in essence, Elliott wave goes like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so this this is how these points will look. There's rules to how far it'll drop back and so forth. So if you see it, and you'll understand, hopefully you'll understand by the end of Saturday, if you start seeing this, you'll know, hey, don't invest here, invest here. Don't invest here, invest here. But no, when we reach up here and we start into this distribution phase, we'll see the pattern of that. Get out, because this is what's coming. Okay, and you're gonna crash. I'm saying this. Everyone's like, well, we don't know. It is so clear. You can see it in the market, and if you follow macro economists, this is what they'll teach you. Okay, and so if you're an investor and not just a trader, this is very important to understand. And there's places you put your money when we're here, and then there's places, what do you do with your money? Because you have to move your money from somewhere, put it somewhere here, you have to put it somewhere here, but it can't be in the same place. So you need to understand what each of these financial instruments do, so you have an understanding of where to put your finances in this process. Does that make sense? As you're going through the process and you see the process changing. General rule is, when everyone's yelling, we're all going to die, that's the time to invest. And when everyone's yelling, the market will never end, that's the time to sell. All right. They basically say, hey, when everyone tells you you're a fool to invest and there's blood in the streets, right? That's when you should be investing the most. And when your grandma calls and says, how do I start investing? That's when you need to get out, okay? Because she has heard this from this person, that person. It's on the news. Everyone's like, the market is just raging, phenomenal. It's going to be so great. And when everyone is here, that's when you better get out, because it's going to do this, right? I didn't know this in 2020. As a matter of fact, this is what started my investment journey. 2020 COVID crash. And I had $1,000 in my savings account. It was my emergency fund at the time. And the crash happened. And I had been just kind of looking at, trying to understand, what is this crypto stuff and what is this? So, and I had been doing a investment account with Edward Jones, and I basically just sent them money and monthly, and they did what they did with it. I didn't even understand what they were doing with it. So the crash happened, and I had been watching this stuff, and I told Angela, I said, I have this $1,000, and I'm going to put it into Ethereum because it's a business-focused crypto, and I really think that it's going to do something here. And so I put it in there, and I just put it in and ignored it, quite frankly. That was probably late March, early April of 2020 that I did that. I bought Ethereum at $180 a token. And at that moment, I decided I'm going to start learning about investing, but I didn't start studying crypto. I started studying stocks, because everyone was talking about stock investing and options and all this type of stuff. So I pulled my money from Edward Jones, and I converted it over to TD Ameritrade, and I started investing it myself, trying to figure it out. And I started reading books, and I started taking classes and so forth. And I did a lot of bad investments up front. Okay, there was a bad learning curve in my process right there. But I didn't have, number one, I didn't know anybody that knew anything about investing. I knew nobody that knew anything. And that was part of the problem, is I had no person I could go to and say, teach me what you know about investing, because everyone I knew that, they basically said, hey, stay away from investing. That's not for preachers, basically. So I made some dumb mistakes, and I did some things that, I wouldn't do again, that's for sure. However, this crypto thing I ignored, and I actually in 21 I was sitting in our men's retreat, and as I'm sitting in the service, I know this sound weird, but I felt like the Lord just said, "You should sell that," and I thought, why? I don't know why I would sell it. I mean, I don't know what it's at, but I think it's going up, so, why would you sell something that's going up? But I really felt impressed. I should sell it. So after the service, I got my phone out and I sold it. And I sold it for $4,600 a token. I bought it for $180. I sold it for $4,600. And I was like, okay, Lord, I did what I felt like God wanted me to do. And I'm not saying you should buy and sell based on how you feel impressed from the Lord. And I don't mean that, and that probably came out wrong. I mean, it's not about a feeling, an impression, or whatever. I did have that, but that's not what you can't sit around and just go, all right, how do I feel? God wants me this and that. I didn't know anything, and I think God protected me is what he did. Okay. It went up a little bit more from there over the next month, and I thought, well, I'm missing out. It's going to just keep going up. And then all of a sudden it dropped. It dropped from like $4,800 all the way down to $800. And it just plummeted like a rock after that. And I got in at the low and I got out at the high, and it was all an accident. Okay. I mean, it was not planning. It was not wise. I wasn't a genius. I was purely accidental, in that regard. Now, but I learned something, and that is I learned that markets go up and markets go down, and markets can go up fast and they can go down fast. And in that process, I gained a lot in the stock market too. I was gaining like crazy in the stock market, but I did not know markets would go down like that. Even when I sold my Ethereum, I had all of my account money in stocks, and that market cratered, and I lost a ton of money in my stock accounts. Now that was my long-term retirement accounts. I wasn't able to pull that money out personally, but I could have sold those and put it in safer investments had I understood that. And that's one of those things that I didn't know what to do. I had never experienced that growth and then fall in that fashion. And what I'm telling you is that is a cycle. It is not something that only happened once. It's something that's getting ready to happen again. We have been here for a while. After the fall, the last crash, all right, it came back up a little, and it's been in this accumulation zone. This is where we have been now for a while, and we're about right here somewhere, okay? And so it's getting ready to go in this next cycle, but you've got to understand that. And so where do you put money theoretically? We're going to look at these different, what things are available, and then we're going to talk about, okay, where would I want my money in this market cycle? Where would I want to position my money theoretically? Okay, and I'm not looking to time. You're never going to be able to time the market perfectly. God protected me. I said that already. I virtually timed the market and didn't have any idea what I was doing. But then on the other hand, I just blew it completely on the other side of it, right? I should have, if I would have sold everything and not just the Ethereum, I would have been a lot better off. But I didn't do that. So, all right, let's talk about some various different instruments. And some of these things you're gonna be like, I already know about that, but I want to just put them out there. Just a savings account is where we're going to start. A savings account is an interest-bearing deposit account that you have at your bank, right? What is a savings account good for? Well, this would be where you would put your emergency funds, right? Something that would be easy to access, your emergency funds, savings for short-term goals like going on vacation, I don't want to be risky with my vacation planning money, right? Or if I'm saving to buy a car, I don't want to be risky with that because that's something that I need to, have accessible and something safe, right? A savings account is not going to pay you much interest. As a matter of fact, generally speaking, it won't even keep up with inflation. All right. So this is for very short term and or emergency use funds, right? Then you get into checking. Now, there are some high yield savings, by the way, and a high yield savings account may get you up to, at this point right here, in a high yield savings, you may get like 4.5% or something. But the thing about a high yield savings is it requires a high balance. Typical savings is it doesn't balance, really doesn't matter. I think my bank has a $5 minimum balance on a savings. But high yield savings is something where you'd have to maintain like a $50,000 balance in there to get your 5%. And actually, I talked to someone the other day that was getting 6% on a high yield savings. And so it can change from bank to bank, and it's not wrong to shop around two banks and figure out who's paying better interest and so forth. I have an account online actually, and an online bank that I keep some funds in because their interest rates are higher. What they pay is higher for short term for savings like that. Okay. Because they don't have any brick and mortar costs and whatnot, so they can pay higher interest. So there's the regular savings, there's a high yield savings. Then you have your checking. Checking kind of runs the gamut. You have your kind of old style checking account, pays very little interest to maybe no interest on your balance. You get checks, you get your ATM card or a Visa debit card or whatever. And a lot of times the banks will waive the fee for, use of your card and so forth. And maybe for ATM transactions at certain places and that. So that is basically just for a regular use. But then you can get obviously premium checking. And in a premium checking, you have to have a higher balance. But you also, if you meet the balance requirements, you get discounts on services from the bank. You may get discount if you have a mortgage. If you have a premium checking and you maintain a certain balance, sometimes banks will give you a mortgage discount if your mortgage is with the bank. Okay, they may provide you some other type of banking supplemental, benefits, if you will. So those type of things. You might even earn a higher rate on your funds that are in there. It could potentially, a premium checking sometimes can be the equivalent of having a money market account as far as the amount of interest that you would earn without the risk that sometimes can come with some of those other funds, because it's completely liquid. There's no withdrawal fees and all that type of stuff. Okay. Then you have some higher interest bearing checking accounts, obviously, that pay higher rates. I have seen a checking account that pays 5.5% interest with ACH deposit. Okay. Recently I saw that. Part of that is because of the Fed interest rate right now is so high. So they're paying a large interest, but that fluctuates. So it will go down when the Fed drops interest rates theoretically. There's no way they can maintain it at that level. But quite frankly, a CD paying 5% is pretty good. But on a certificate of deposit, otherwise known as a CD, you have to guarantee to leave it for a certain amount of time. In your checking, there's no requirement for that, right? So, so if you can get a high yield checking account, it's probably going to pay you better than most regular savings accounts. And to earn that way. The thing you got to remember is if it's available to spend, there's going to be the temptation to spend it, right? So you've got to be very disciplined if that's the case. And if you can't be very disciplined, then you need to put it in a place that it is locked away and you can't spend it just willy-nilly, right? Where you have to take it out at a certain time. So those type of things would be where we would get into some different types of accounts. So the basic accounts would be your savings and high yield savings, your regular checking premium account, and then high yield account. And so those would kind of be your main regular usage accounts that the average person would have, right? That's probably something everyone already knows. So I haven't told you anything new yet, but we're going to go ahead and take a break. We'll take our 10-minute break here, and then when we start back up, we're going to go into some things that I didn't know and had to learn over the last 4 years. Hopefully it'll be a help to you as well.